there's literally no treatment, nobody's talking about it, but around 90% of women are affected by some sort of premenstrual symptoms, 20 to 30% by symptoms that are so severe that they should be treated, medically speaking.
The average diagnostic delay is 12 years for PMDD, the severe version of PMS. By measuring those biomarkers, by actually having that as a digital health constantly with that user, you can probably reduce those 12 years.
Welcome to FNet Silica's We Talk IoT. We'll chat with innovators, experts, and business owners to learn how they are implementing IoT and using data to create new business opportunities. I am your host, Stephanie Schaider. Today we are again heading to the show floor of Electronica and its Advanced Electronics Challenge, a competition run by FNet Silica together with Altium, Renesas, and by Startup that spotlights hardware-driven startups. And this year's second place trophy went to Belle Health, a Femtech venture attacking cyclical pain with a smart wearable and an evidence-based therapy app. So my guests today are Belle Health co-founder CEO Victoria Schoeffel and CTO Rafael Schaider. And together we will unpack why women's physiology is still an afterthought in electronics and how real-time hormone sensing and AI can personalize care. Welcome to the show, Victoria and Rafael. It's great to have you, and congratulations on the second place.
Thank you for having us, and we're very excited to be here and having been part of the challenge.
Likewise, thank you. Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and, of course, Belle Health, your project or your company.
Yeah, so at Belle Health, we're really trying to understand how hormonal fluctuations across the menstrual cycle impact the health of women, because that's something that's not really done right now. And for that, we started with our app-based approach and look at all the psychological data that we can collect from the app of symptom tracking and like how that correlates with the cycle. And there are like a lot of very, very interesting patterns where then also interventions can be tailored better. And from that starting point, we were like, okay, what can we do now? Like how can we make this even more useful to get like better data, get a better understanding of the female body? And for us, the right direction to go there was to gather more physiological data, which brought us into the whole realm of electronics.
Okay. And how did you come up with the idea? So it's, as I understand, Victoria, I think you have a medical background and Rafael, you have an engineering background. So how did your journey start?
Yeah, I would say it's probably really the marriage between those two backgrounds and bringing all the different opportunities together of what can we do. We really started with the problem in the end of, and they're focused in on one health condition that we decided to start on working with, which is premenstrual symptoms or premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a very severe version of symptoms that only occur before the period, but that can lead to extreme suicidality and like many symptoms.
Wow, yeah.
And then during follicular phase, so like after the period, the symptoms just disappear. And we realized, and that was something that came over from my side, that there's literally no treatment, nobody's talking about it, but around 90% of women are affected by some sort of premenstrual symptoms, 20 to 30% by symptoms that are so severe that they should be treated, medically speaking. And with that, I came to Rafa and we were like thinking, okay, what can we do? Where can we bring data in? How can we develop like therapies for that? And develop like first a psychological approach. We were like, okay, but now to get like more specific data of where is somebody in their cycle? How is this cycle varying? We actually need more of this physiological data that we get via hardware and where we need the electronics part. And that's where you, Rafa, like came into the whole conversation of saying, what solutions can we develop for this?
Yeah, probably at the beginning, like Victoria was like really trying to even convince and showing the pain, because as a man, like you not necessarily know about all those conditions and all the implications that the hormonal fluctuation occur on the female body. Because we do have variations on testosterone, but not as much on estrogen and progesterone. So actually, even understanding that conscientization of, okay, that it is a problem, it is something that have a lot of pain related to it and symptoms. And then, of course, like, okay, let's build something that is medically, scientifically relevant, especially on female health, that there is a lot of pseudoscience. So, yeah, it was based on science that Vicky convinced me to join.
Something that pops up on YouTube once so often is like a pain simulator. I don't know if you know about this. There's like a device that simulates the pain some women go through every month. And it was tested on, I think, I don't know, some policeman from Texas is a video I know at a convention that like a booth, and every guy that came along could see and how high on the scale he got was from 1 to 10. And then the woman would say, well, for me, an 8 is normal. And he would already start kind of crying at level 4. So that was kind of an interesting concept to make men understand what some women go through.
Yeah, that one is actually really interesting because I think we just came across it maybe 2 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
And then realized that it's a very old trend that we completely missed.
Yeah.
And then I showed it to you, Raf, like as well, like on this. And it's very interesting because I think that's already visualizing one of the aspects of like physical pain that especially, for example, women with endometriosis experience very, very strongly, and which I think was already a little bit earlier also recognized that there are like different companies that are working on solutions like for those areas. And then I think now the next, I would say like Femtech started with fertility, then it got into menopause, like some solutions for endometriosis, which is the severe period pain and like from one of the symptoms. And I think now there's like going to be like also a next wave where a lot of it is about understanding female health as hormonal health. And how do actually health conditions in general change? Like not only those typical gynecological conditions, but how do health conditions vary actually in biological women to biological men because of those differences in hormones? And that can be even diseases that we would normally talk about, like diabetes type 1. Glucose fluctuations change across the menstrual cycle. Insulin resistance changes. So actually how medications should be applied across the menstrual cycle should also change for a lot of conditions, so that we don't think about female health necessarily as this one category, but it's more that it applies to every single area of the body. So every single area of medicine is impacted with that. And for every single area, we will also need then that type of data. And that's the same for the devices that we use, that we need to include that type of data collection that is actually specifically for women then, and bring this perspective of female first into the products that we do, so that we can actually deliver like a better value for women as well.
Most of all the hardware and even the pharmaceuticals, the treatments are usually, as I understand it, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, are only tested on men. And that doesn't cater to the fact that women's bodies are just not physically, but also like from their components and from the way they take in treatment completely different, right?
So from 1993 onwards, it was all the clinical trials. It was like a rule that it needed to have, like every new drug development would need to have a female cohort. But before that, all medication that we have available, it was not necessary to have a female cohort.
It still doesn't consider like actually the variations of the cycle, right? And there are still a lot of limitations. So for example, for a pregnant woman, and then like, yes, you do have like dangerous effects, but then if you use those things later in pregnancy as well, then you also need to test it, like as simple as that, right? So it's like, there's still like a lot of limitations. And I think there are in certain areas, like maybe like some steps back, but there's also like a lot of, especially in Europe, I think like a lot of willingness. And in Germany, what we see a lot of interest from our political side, from like health insurance side, from systematic partner side, to actually start the conversations about those topics, to see like, how can we even get the data that is lacking right now?
1993, this is not long ago. It is really scary. And that's something that I used to never think about it. For some naive reason, I always thought that it would have been tested on women as well. I was really shocked to learn that it's not. Like, what? Thank you. It is quite shocking and not well known. And then with PMS and PMDD, I think it's also, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, what the real problem is. It's not only in quotation marks, pain. But as you said, it's also really fatal consequences because some symptoms are, I think, really severe depressions that can lead to suicide, and not understanding the hormonal consequences can lead to really severe medical conditions, right? So just to give our listeners a little bit of context, maybe you can summarize that from your standpoint as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so for example, for PMDD, which is like this most severe version, it stands for Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder, and it affects around 5 to 8% of women in reproductive age. So if one of our listeners knows around 20 women, one of them is very likely going to have this condition. And what it means is it's like our very severe depression that only is apart for 1 to 2 weeks before the period. Then it completely disappears again, and then it returns again as soon as ovulation occurred. That every single month, again and again. And many of them are just misdiagnosed with depression or bipolar disease or anger management or like many other things that are not recognizing the impact that those hormonal changes in the cycle actually have. So they can also not be treated properly and not like get the care. And just to put up like one number here, there are like studies that show that around 76% of women with PMDD have suicidal ideation, and 35% have attempted suicide. Like not thinking about suicide, not having a suicidal plan, but have attempted suicide during their lifetime. So that's like really the group that is like really at risk in the end. And we're not recognizing how much this is tied to the cycle. It's also in the end like the population of women who are in prison, we have like higher numbers of them who are actually impacted by that because it leads to a lot of consequences in society. And the more research we will do on that, we'll also understand even the impact that it has on relationships and like work and how that impacts not only the women who are affected, but actually us as a society.
Yeah, it really is quite astonishing once you make the effort to really understand this, right? What is the solution you are now working on? What does your product try to solve? Can you walk us through what you have developed?
Yes, so our product right now consists really of 2 parts. We have the app, which provides, first of all, like symptom tracking correlations to the menstrual cycle, because the first step is that we actually need to recognize that those symptoms are actually tied to a certain pattern. With that, we include actually a lot of different psychological therapy approaches inside the app. So that's like where like the evidence base comes in from, like what is actually evidence base for giving recommendations of what lifestyle changes can be done, what like therapy concepts and psychology can be applied to actually improve conditions of that. But then also what are potential treatment options, because it really varies based on the person and whether a medication route is better or whether like a therapy would be like the better route to go. And that's all included in our app. And for that, we've also already finished our first clinical trial to actually prove effectiveness for this first health condition.
Cool.
And then the second part that goes into like this concept is actually the Belle Smart Ring, which will track like a variety of physiological variables. And again, look at this, like how do those changes of the menstrual cycle that we can then also determine way more specifically by knowing, did a woman ovulate? Did she not ovulate? That changes actually the hormonal patterns from that. Like how did like the heart rate variability change? Like a lot of like those patterns that like we know that change across the menstrual cycle, and where we have like more like from that via like our own custom smart ring that integrates into that, and with that gives more specific and better recommendations, as well as showing how much like the exercises at one moment can even help. So it really works together to bring like this system that's digital with psychological like inputs together with like the physiological system that we're developing, and with the goal to really start with like a first version of that and then build on top of that to bring like the most accurate data analysis to that female body. And we really see that as starting with PMDD and PMAS PMDD, but then like also right now, for example, already around 40% of our users of our app have ADHD as well, which is one of those conditions where we know that it changes significantly across the menstrual cycle, which is also one of the reasons why it wasn't really recognized properly in the past in women. And actually making those changes visible, and with that, using that data that we're collecting to really give better recommendations and predictions, and potentially in future use cases also enhance the diagnostic process.
Yeah. Also, like the difference between currently our society historically are addressing like in a temporal way of 24 hours, 7 days, like weekly or monthly, or then yearly. But when we look into the female biology, it makes so much more sense to have a menstrual cycle length that you analyze your patterns and your data based on that flexibility of sometimes 28, 32, and so on and so forth. So to analyze those data points based on a menstrual cycle time frame and not necessarily on a daily time frame. And then that is, we see as a big root cause of misdiagnostic for ADHD or female ADHD, because basically you don't take into consideration that where that individual is on her menstrual cycle and the symptoms that like vary depending on if she's on luteal or follicular phase.
Okay, interesting. And so you're using the hardware angle to collect the data to then prove or to make it visible, basically the data you are collecting. So I suppose there are lots of sensors in your ring. What data are you collecting, or which sensors are on board?
Initially, we want to map with state-of-the-art technology because today so well-known wearable devices, Apple Watch, Garmin, like all of those with state-of-the-art sensors such as heart rate, temperature, activity monitoring. And those are very standard and used on validated into the market. So right now, as a first iteration, we use those sensors to map the difference between what we know about general population / default male to really see, okay, what is the difference within those metrics at the female body? And of course, ideally, what we aim for is to have a constant measurement of progesterone and estrogen and be able to plot that graph and correlate how high your estrogen or how high your progesterone are, and then the effect of that with your symptoms. But that technology is not ready yet. Those ICs, those integrated circuits for measuring those are not. There is like studies, for example, at Cambridge with mid-infrared laser for like skin sweat, like localized sweat, but that it's only validated within labs and not available to the public.
So how are you measuring those levels?
So right now we create that platform, which basically uses the state-of-the-art technology that today every wearable uses, or the better ones use, to really differentiate to a female solution.
And a lot of the magic actually comes at the stage from the data interpretation and the data algorithms. And there is so much potential of things that are actually not done at all yet, where we have enough indications from small research trials, but then what is a research trial when you have like 100 people and not like on a bigger scale really using that even for like applications for that? So just to give one example, heart rate variability varies across the menstrual cycle. That's actually not used like for that purpose at all anywhere right now. Right now, temperature sensors are used to do like a prediction of like the period length at like this state. But for example, heart rate variability is like just ignored. And then there are even more studies that show, for example, for one specific use case as PMDD, heart rate variability might vary between women who have it and who don't have it. Again, it's like not used. And that's really something that for accuracy, it is like going condition by condition and segmenting like different women, because it's female health doesn't mean it's the exact same use case for everybody, because bodies still vary a lot. But really honing in on like those different ones and then providing specific value from that data that we are collecting.
I think society for long face female health as reproductive health and being like, okay, the female body is something just to reproduce, and then we want, and that's very bad. We want to really like, actually, okay, how can we face the female body as a female body that needs to live better and with better quality of life, and then for that addressing endometriosis, PMS, and perimenopause with all those symptoms, and then mapping like the type of variability on those measurements for those individuals.
And once this sensing data hits the cloud, how do you translate this into actionable feedback?
One example, it's very like that is a tangible example is like, let's say you have PMDD, so you have a severe depression before your period, and we are measuring your heart rate frequency, your stress movements, and we identify that you are on your phase, on your critical phase, and you are with an elevated heart rate, elevated stress. We can ping you a notification to, okay, calm down, let's maybe do like one of your favorite CBT exercises. Let's say progressive muscle relaxation or art meditation. Something that I really like is like just going through an art and then pushing your mind out of whatever you are doing. And we can have the biofeedback of before that activity and after that activity. So it's really acute to that moment that you need the most. Or for example, you are feeling suicidal, which is something that unfortunately we see more and more on our social media, people mentioning that they feel suicidal before their period. So at those moments, you would measure very high stress levels, very high heart rate frequency. It's something that we could, at that point, be at their side and recommend something. As well as, of course, we do have a SOS feature within the app to, if you are feeling that way, please just call your local emergency, and then you have like a professional to take care of.
I can imagine that at one point along the roadmap, it would be really cool if you kind of bring everyone together, if you can then, from app users that can then get professional psychological or psychiatrical help, or that you can be referred to your doctor, or that you can share the data and help your medical professional with a diagnosis. And so that's basically the goal you have, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the goal.
Absolutely. Today, the average diagnostic delay is 12 years for PMDD, the severe version of PMS.
Okay.
Why that happened? Because it needs to be so severe, and the person, it's so lower on that difference between post-period and after period, that the person really like tried maybe suicidal a few times, and then the family members or herself in a different moment, okay, I need to take care of it, and then convince a general practitioner to take a look. And many of the doctors, they don't even know about, or it's not very well known, PMDD. By measuring those biomarkers, by actually having that as a digital health constantly with that user, you can probably reduce those 12 years. And our goal is to really like not have 12 years, like maybe like a few months only, to identify if that person has like that degree of difference between symptoms in one phase and the other. And then really not allow that patient to have those very severe symptoms, should then have help.
We will take a short break. Stay with us. We will be hearing from our guests very shortly. This podcast is brought to you by AFNet Silica, the engineers of evolution. We help you bring secure, intelligent, and connected products to market. If you want to learn more about us, we have put information and links in this episode's show notes, and you can also connect with us on LinkedIn or afnet-silica.com. That's avnet-silica.com.
And you're based in Germany, but your solution targets the European market. How do you tackle all the different regulations? And is there like a European-wide health standard, or does every country have its own regulations?
Actually, Europe is fine because it's literally one standard. It's like the medical device regulatory framework. Yeah. So I think it's like way more like, I think for us, we are also looking into the American market as well, because even in the American market, which is usually a little bit earlier on the innovation side, there's literally nothing. And many of our users are also coming from the US currently already. So that's like those two frameworks that we're focusing on first. And where we see also that there's like, maybe enough awareness, because the prevalence is like clear. Then it depends a little bit on where people are based, on whether they even know like about it, and whether they will recognize things early enough, or at what stage we really enter in like their journey. Because for some, we'll be able, like as Rav just said, like to really like reduce like the time of like diagnostics to like 2-3 months instead of like years and years of waiting. Very many of them waited already for like a long time, but then for others it will also be this, okay, what is like actually the right treatment for me? Because currently, even for like many other use cases beyond PMDD, it would be like, okay, try this hormonal contraceptive. Those like side effects are not that great. Okay, then like go for like the next one. And then it's like this really like this trial and error phase, and where there is like really like a lack of a data-based approach to understand what is working better, like what is the impact. Because often in like this area, whether it's antidepressants, whether it's like hormonal contraceptives, whether it's like psychological therapies, whether it's like supplements, they're like probably like the least evidence-based, but it's like there's not this one perfect solution that works just for everybody in the same way. So a lot of like this approach will need to be also data-based and like in a trial and error. But the more you can reduce like this time to really know, okay, this is like working better, this is working worse, and even bringing this data together and aggregating that from like a lot of users will do like a big difference in the future for being able to figure out like what makes really sense, like for those areas and like for the conditions people are really experiencing.
Yeah. In Europe, there is the medical device regulation, the called MDR within Europe. And that really is this deployment of medical devices within the Eurozone. But also one of the things that I really would like to mention here is that it's within the core of like what we build is that digital component. The fact of being digital and having that digital companion with you, you can target populations on remote places or countries where they don't necessarily have access to health. And that is something that it's very, like for us, it's very important. For example, let's say you only have a phone in the middle of Africa. If you have access to internet, you download our app and then you can use it to literally follow you along with your menstrual cycle. So, of course, once you have that data there within, we have medical reports that you can export from your phone to then, bring to your doctor and say, hey, that's my patterns. Here it's saying that I have something like PMDD, maybe probably for the person will not even know what it is. And then the doctor can then actually give the appropriate guidance.
That is really cool. Also in areas where there's probably not a medical professional around in rural areas, I imagine it'll be like a radius of like 200 kilometers at least, if you're lucky, I suppose. Yep. Interesting.
And with that, even, for example, in rural areas, normally the medical professions on those areas, for example, Victoria can have like her testimony here. Not that long ago, Victoria was like studying at Cambridge, and there the knowledge around female health conditions or female variations are not necessarily the most relevant or the most taught on the university. So sometimes you have like maybe a rural area with a very old professional that doesn't necessarily know those terms or those conditions or it's very far from the quotidian. So even giving that to the doctor of like, hey, here you have something on your patient that it might not be something that you are used to diagnose, but here we have a likelihood score that patient probably has that PMDD or endometriosis or PCOS.
Actually, very often the knowledge is also lacking, and the data in medicine. And then also coming from a medical background, I not even judge it sometimes too harshly, because there's a lot of different stuff that you actually will need to know, and it's very complicated, and we like to simplify it also, and then you'll forget like a lot that you're actually learning like at some point. But right now, I think the status quo in medicine is that we lack a lot of data and we lack a lot of knowledge of how does the female body vary. And it's something that you said at the beginning, that actually a lot of like pharmaceuticals were for a very long time not studied at all on the female body. And their justification, the reasoning for that was, well, like the female body changes across the menstrual cycle, that's too complex, so the data will vary too much. So actually the data will not be that good, so we will not use it. And then okay, let's go back a little bit in time. Like, fair enough, it was more difficult to do data analysis and interpretation back in the days. But right now, we live in like an age where we have really personalized treatments for a lot of areas. And we believe that that's also the time to have that for the whole area of like medicine that impacts women. And what Raf said about like that being even more the case in rural areas, for sure, but not only. Like, it's like across the board that we are like lacking that, and like this knowledge and understanding of recognizing diseases actually in the right way. And we start with, for us, like in one focus area so that we can really make the biggest impact there. But then in the end, heart diseases are also not recognized properly in women. Like if a woman has a heart attack and goes to the hospital, she's way more likely going to be sent away and told that she's just making up the pain that she's experiencing. Also, symptoms show up a little bit differently. So we don't learn about like those, because we learn like the typical symptoms of like a pain, like your shoulder and your jaw, and like then it's symptoms that men actually experience. And yes, men are more typically affected by heart attacks, but then women are not recognized to be treated properly. And that's something where we see like a little bit of change in like certain areas and like certain conditions where we get more data, and we need that in just way more. And I personally really believe, or like at least hope, that we're going to look back in, let's say, like 10, max like 20 years, and we're going to say like crazy, like back in the days, it was like in the Stone Age, like they were like really not doing any of this. Like, can you imagine living in this time when they would just not know about this and not consider actually that your biomarkers change, and that we would need to consider that time variable to make more accurate predictions, or when we say what the medication will get, that we didn't have any of that personalization? That must have led to actually way worse outcomes back then. It's like my hope that at some point we'll look back like this, and that we'll even laugh about like how we used to do it.
That's a great vision. So in 5 years' time, or maybe 10 years, what would success look like for you, for Belle Health? And how can listeners or even potential partners get involved right now?
Yeah, I think our society right now, it's developing like AI, it's on everybody's mind, and machine learning algorithms, the capability of digitally compare one data point to millions of data sets. It's not even the future, it's the reality right now. So in 5 years' time, having the possibility of translating a physiological body, which is like then our like vision of that single individual, and being able to compare to those data sets to really automatize a screen of who's this person, what she's experienced, how can we improve her quality of life. That I think it's the future. And we are working for that, actually.
Maybe to add to that, also feel like our goal in like 5 years is to reach the maximum amount of women, to make like the biggest difference also like in the end in their lives, and for the information that we can actually like provide, and at the same time collect in some way like a very comprehensive data sets that for users that opt in, of course, that we can use that long term on like the research side, so that we have a better understanding. And in many ways, that also would mean that we start to set a new standard, so that from a company perspective, that we're the first to actually really strongly go into that. But then in maybe 5 years, a lot of other companies will also have joined us like on this journey of saying like, to give me like a very random example of, we've been developing our notifications feature for our app, and also our users of like for feedback for like our initial design drafts. And then like some users said, and I felt so embarrassed at that moment of like, hey, actually, I need to take my medication cycle-based. So I only need to take it on certain cycle days and not on others. And I would need to have a feature that is like adaptable for that. And I was like, why did I just develop like a feature that's just based on the week, and then like on the days, also Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that you can choose which days, and not thinking about like those changes. And I think that's like a very concrete example where that applies to this one individual feature. I think the goal in 5 years is that every single part of like the process and what we're developing, we are thinking through newly of like, what would it mean if this would be developed for the first time for the users that are actually only female? What difference does that actually make at like this point? And set a new standard in like this area, so that like when people go like into like applications, there are like more changes because we can do that and use like this data to give really more personalized experiences so that those for women actually also become more accurate for them.
And I do have to ask you, what drew you to participate in the Advanced Electronics Challenge? It is a very technical, engineer-focused, hardware-based competition, I guess. Were there any takeaways? What did you learn? What did you like about the challenge? Why did you do it?
I think the first why is that I come from engineering, and my class of engineering was 200 guys, like male individuals. And with that, it's the amount of technology that is developed, all AI and everything that it's advanced, historically was built from male to male. And why not take the technical approach to something that it's not necessarily the status quo, to really bring, and like as I mentioned at the beginning, unfortunately, a lot of the female health companies and efforts that we see, they lack on scientific evidence and being really a reliable, scientifically thought through advanced electronics, let's say. So basically, like by using that and having access to experts with Renesas, Avnet Silica, to really boost and bring the best on the market right now to that population. So that's mainly the why we work on it.
I think like what we're trying to do, it involves a lot of expertise and knowledge, and it's like, it's difficult, and in the end, like the change that we want to create from like individual product development to like really like the big change of like the company we want to build and the change we want to make in the world, we cannot do that alone. We do need supporters, and we need people who are like equally excited or not excited yet, but like are thinking about it's like, hey, yeah, like this wasn't like done like this yet. Like actually that's like something that has a lot of potential of impacting people, and is an interesting challenge. We need like all of like those different types of collaborations and partnerships and supporters to create this, to have like a village to create like something that was not there yet, like for women. And I think that's really like what the Advanced Electronics Challenge was also for us, like the support to really go ahead, like on this journey that we're working on, creating something that is also technically challenging, but to really make there like the biggest difference that we can't do alone.
Absolutely terrific. Victoria, Rafael, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. It was super interesting to learn about the differences in medicine and physiology and the product you have built around it and the effort you're putting into getting the message out. I hope this podcast will help on this journey, and we will put all the information about Belle Health in the show notes so that if maybe potential partners, supporters, researchers, whatever you need can reach out to you. I wish you all the best, and I hope to have you again on the podcast and talk more about the journey you had in the future.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure all mine.
This was Avnet Silica's We Talk IoT. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a rating. Talk to you soon.